This project seeks to reframe the Whale Creek Basin of Newtown Creek. This proposal is based around three driving principles: the idea and material of influx/efflux, the work of artist Sarah Say, specifically her relationship to ground, and the introduction of a field station to the site. Throughout the semester, we have studied the concept of influx and efflux and how that interacts with the site and addresses the idea of the critical zone. What are the driving forces of the site? How does the site realize dynamism and interact with it? In order to answer this, we needed to address the observations of several zones. There are water treatment tanks, water ponds, an existing nature walk, the influence of Sarah Say's interaction with the ground, and finally the sedimentation and flow of sand. These all exist within the critical zone of the site. This led me to study the dynamic nature of water and how it forms environments interacting in a fluxing capacity. I focused my research on sand formations caused by their proximity to water and drew figurative derivations from these studies. In this first series of interactions, I noticed a rhythm in multiple directions that began to form, which followed the logic of frequency. Although interesting, the geometric forms were too rigid, as the interactions were based on a continuous waveform inside a container, passing back and forth over the sand. Instead, I opted to study sand on a smaller scale, but in an environment with less physical limitations on the form making. From this, a pattern started to emerge, and I would use this to inform the geometry moving forward. The second but equally important aspect of this project is its relationship to the ground. I found artist Sarah Say's approach and relationship with the ground to be wholly informative. Through her work, she maintains a relationship of flux, fragility, and fracture when dealing with the ground. These were three aspects I wanted to tie into the narrative of the project and incorporate in design decisions. She states that the relationship to the ground should not be one of ownership, and I agree. In the words of Stan Allen, landscapes change and evolve, and they too are shaped by force and resistance working over time. The forces of the tidal flow, the CSO, and the hardscape lead to flux, fragility, and fracture. Newtown Creek is an artifact of New York's industrial waterfront, a hardscaped inlet serving the churning gears of a city. Over the centuries, its natural form has been transformed by human decree and no longer adheres to the form natural flux gave it hundreds of years ago. Part of this project is to soften the boundary between the urban and the natural, the hardscape and the living edge. By softening that transition and bringing people in, the field station begins to take form. As the third driving principle of the project, the field station represents an opportunity to bring people up close with and interact with the natural boundaries of the physical world. Aside from the hardscape, this site presents several environmental and physical challenges due to its extensive industrial use over the last century and a half. When examining the critical zone, it became apparent how much of the site was contaminated with heavy metals, industrial runoff, and the remnants of an oil spill in the 1970s. Even today, it is still the location of three large CSO outflows that lead directly from the Newtown Creek wastewater treatment plant. Even with the expansion of the plant, as of 2014, the city is still not in full compliance with the 1972 Federal Clean Water Act, which mandates that secondary treatment should remove 85% of pollutants from incoming sewage, or with New York State's 1992 order for the city to prevent overflows by 2013. Overflows from the Newtown Creek plant, on the order of 100 million U.S. gallons, occur on average of once a week. When sewage loads exceed the capacity of Newtown Creek sewage treatment facility, trash, pesticides, petroleum products, PCBs, mercury, cadmium, lead, pathogenic microorganisms, and nutrients which reduce the dissolved oxygen content of the water are dumped into Newtown Creek. This dumping is referred to as combined sewer overflow, or CSO. CSOs can be triggered by as little as 1/10 of an inch of rain. This presents a major design challenge and begs the question, is the existing nature walk really a nature walk if there is not much alive around the site? With that challenge comes the possibility of convergence between the toxic underground and the people who inhabit the city. This project aims to address two issues associated with this CSO outflow. The first is the lack of oxygen in the water caused by the pollutants and intense micronutrients. This creates a dead zone and makes the inlet void of all life. By incorporating oxygenators, one can begin to reclaim the water and reoxygenate it. This allows for sea life such as oysters and other filter feeders to come and live there, further cleaning the water. The second issue that the project aims to address is the public's lack of awareness that this is taking place. The field station diverts one of the main CSO outflows through the building in a manner that brings individuals up close, visually, with what they dump into the river. This then becomes aesthetic infrastructure. It brings people up close with the mechanisms of society that keep it operating, but are often hidden away. In the words of David Solomon, infrastructure is often big, utilitarian, and based on efficiency, indifferent to the urban and suburban landscapes they sit in. The relevance of aesthetics in infrastructure is that they provide an alternative, non-hierarchical framework for conceptualizing and producing it. Using synthetic techniques of aesthetics and sensibility opens up the possibility of understanding the field station as an integrated part of the landscape rather than something isolated from it. How do we organize these different forces acting on the site and harmonize them with the influx of people into it? The formal language of the field station follows the morphology of the fluxing sand, intertwining the CSO outflow with the human flow through the structure. It is important to note the speed at which these forces act and the geography moves. Stan Allen states that architecture is situated between the biological and the geological, slower than living beings, but faster than underlying geology. Resistance and change are both at work in the landscape, the hardness of the rock, the fluid adaptability of living things. There are several different speeds at play throughout the site's different zones: the moving water, the oil spill underground, the growth of plants, different geological processes, and of course the movement of people. The project aims to showcase these interactions, muddling the line between architecture and landscape.